All right. I think we can go ahead and start. I want to welcome everyone, I guess good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from around the world to our final third session on water for inclusive health and food security. Today, we will focus on action to enable benefits of water for food and health. I want to thank very much our conveners, CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, the Catholic Relief Services, Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, my own institution, Michigan State University, and of course, Stockholm International Water Institute. There's been tremendous support, and of course, all of these groups have contributed to this program. We've had two previous sessions that have introduced us to the connectivity between water security and food security. And really, if we're going to address SDG 2 successfully, we must understand the relationship to the SDG 6 and really think about how we integrate many of our goals. In the first sessions, we learned that 60% of the rain-fed agriculture, much of this which is family-based, is at risk. There's a lack of irrigation infrastructure, and so they're not able to water under extreme droughts, and droughts are definitely a major consideration. And of course, this is all related to this climate impact, really leading to major insecurities around water and food. And of course, there's other pollution issues associated with the various practices on the ground. We discussed that we needed to address environmental sustainability of food systems in a holistic way, in a systematic way. We heard that availability and accessibility are measured. These are things that we can measure, but experiences on the ground, actually implementation, are not often measured. And new tools are available that can help us capture some of these lessons learned or experiences that we can share. Groundwater, of course, is an important component which supports irrigation, and enhancing access to groundwater can really support the two goals of water security and food security. And really bringing practical tools to the field is going to be very important. We heard from the EU about green solutions and focusing on those that are sustainable, very inclusive and fair, and really investing in those aspects. And that the support of government agencies and groups to produce global collaborations and networks are going to be necessary as we strive to meet these, our SDG 2 and SDG 6. And we're already behind because of other pressures such as COVID, which we're all kind of in the midst experiencing now. So there's no doubt that water security is a fundamental brick in building resilience for vulnerable populations. It's going to supply health, sanitation, of course, then the food and nutrition. It's very challenging for everyday life for the 2.4 billion people globally. We really need solutions in action, implementation, and investments that address multiple positive outcomes. And of course, we need resilience for these future shocks, as we've already mentioned, COVID and climate. So this session in particular will bring examples on action and implementation that can bring systematic change by addressing multiple water, food, and health objectives for the most vulnerable. Now, today's session will start with some videos, which are going to focus on the solutions, and then our presenters of these videos will take part in an interactive panel discussion. After that, we'll ask you to go take a poll. We've got a poll in the Pathable platform. And if you hit that poll, you'll be able to take it anytime. We're going to gather some information from you. And finally, we'll have some breakouts as part of our interactive discussion. We'll come back and have some concluding remarks. So we hope all of that goes very smoothly. So appreciate your patience, all of you here that are joining us. I'm going to start with our first video. Our first two videos, in fact, are really about shocks and short-term action taken on the ground. So we'll start with the first video. And this will be about rural piped water and food and economic security in Zambia by James Winter at Stanford University.
Hi, everyone. My name is James Winter, and I recently finished my PhD at Stanford University in Civil and Environmental Engineering, and will be starting work in the Bureau of Global Health as a technical specialist at USAID in the fall. Today, I'd like to speak about my work measuring the impacts of rural piped water systems on households in southern Zambia. The motivation for this project was the enormous burden of water fetching, especially borne by women and girls, that I observed during my 2 years conducting fieldwork in Zambia. In Zambia, less than 5% of rural households have access to piped water, a rate that is unchanged since 2015. Because piped water is so rare in sub-Saharan Africa and Zambia in particular, there is limited research, especially prospective research, on the impact of transitioning from unimproved water sources like the one shown here to piped water sources. As this picture suggests, the burden of water fetching is borne primarily by women and girls. This time could be used for caregiving, schooling, sleep, leisure, work outside the home, or productive uses of water. And across the region, the UN estimates that hundreds of millions of hours are spent every day by women fetching water, all as a result of limited water access. Guided by this motivation, I conducted a prospective study in rural Zambia that measured the impact of transitioning from off-plot water sources to shared or private water taps on time spent fetching water by all members of the household, and frequency and intensity of productive uses of water, such as gardening or livestock rearing. The crux of this project was understanding the impact of the transition shown in the picture here, from unimproved water sources, like this uncovered well, to improved water taps shared by 1 to 4 households. The implementing partner in this study was World Vision, who constructed the piped water systems in 2 villages. Data collection occurred over 12 months and was a mix of survey data collected by Zambian enumerators and direct measurements of location, fetching events, water consumption, and distance to water sources using a mix of GPS data and water meters. This was a prospective, non-randomized study of 4 villages, where the 2 treatment villages were selected by World Vision due to their reliance on unimproved water sources, and I selected 2 match control villages, which were matched based on population, access to healthcare facilities, access to a primary school, and access to markets. Moving into the results, this is a satellite map of one of the treatment villages at baseline. These 2 blue dots represent the only sources of year-round drinking water in treatment village 1, and the median distance to source, as measured through using QGIS, is 253 meters. After the intervention, the density of water sources increased dramatically, as shown by the increase in blue dots, reducing the median distance to a water source by over 90% to just 15 meters. We then took advantage of our panel data to use mixed effects models to estimate the changes in time spent fetching water by each member of the household. This plot summarizes our findings. On the x-axis, we see the percent change in weekly fetching time, where a negative value indicates a reduction in weekly fetching time. And the y-axis, we have different members of the household, summarizes the household in total at the top of the y-axis. Overall, we measured a reduction in time spent fetching water at the household level of nearly 4 hours, reduction of 79%. In particular, women and girls saw their time spent fetching water significantly decrease by 75% and 70% respectively. Unsurprisingly, the only population with no significant changes in time spent fetching water were adult men. To put these numbers in context, if extrapolated to a full year, this savings of 3 hours per week adds up to over a month of full-time work. But the question always arises, how did people use this time? I would claim that these time savings were allocated productively. 54% of households reported spending more time on gardening. Households had 4.4 times higher odds of reporting to cultivate a garden, and the enumerator team measured a growth in garden area of 57 square meters, greater than a 100% increase in garden size over baseline. Households tended to grow green vegetables like grapeseed or okra, or other healthy foods like tomatoes or eggplant. 62% reported selling some, but not all of their produce, indicating a balance of priorities between food security and income generation. To conclude, I want to recap the key findings. In this study, we measured large, significant time savings and increases in productive uses of water, especially in regards to gardening, in support of food and economic security. I note that the work here presented is a benefits analysis only, and I hope that these findings inspire additional prospective research measuring the life cycle cost implications of these investments in rural areas, especially in very small piped water systems. I want to also acknowledge my wonderful data collection team, my funders at Stanford and the US Fulbright program, and World Vision as an implementing partner. If anyone has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them in the panel session that follows, or via email at the email address shown below. Thank you very much. I'll leave these takeaways up on the screen and happy to take any questions.
Very good. And we'll move on to the second video. In this case, we will be hearing from Daniel Smith from Stanford University and his work in Uganda, effective demand for reliable hand pumps in rural Uganda. So let me go to my shared screen.
My name is Daniel Smith, and I'm pleased to summarize this research from Stanford University on demand for more reliable hand pumps in rural Uganda, which was funded by the Hilton Foundation. This research is about what role water users should be expected to play in the long-term financing of drinking water services in lower-income countries. This topic is of great importance because access to water infrastructure is increasing, but much of that infrastructure operates only intermittently or fails prematurely. Without sustainable models for financing operation and maintenance, the global water sector risks backsliding on the progress being made towards the human right to water for all. We study this topic in Apache and Kwania, two districts in northern Uganda where water supply conditions are similar to those across much of Africa. The most common type of infrastructure are drilled boreholes with hand pumps. Each pump is managed by a single water committee under the community management policy, which is the norm in most lower-income countries. Across Africa, about 200 million people use hand pumps managed like this, but they typically get little maintenance, fail, and then cost the government or aid extra money to replace. Several organizations have recently developed professionalized maintenance and repair models as an alternative to the community management model. In theory, professionalizing services can ensure fast repairs, help water users to hold their water committees and service providers accountable, and pools risk across many communities to reduce costs. But these professional services, to different degrees, rely on communities to pay for an important share of the cost of providing this higher level of service. Here, we partnered with a local social enterprise to, for the first time, experimentally test willingness and ability to pay for this type of service. Our research questions were how much are water committees in rural Uganda both willing and able to pay, what I will refer to as their effective demand, for increased hand pump reliability provided by a professional service. And second, how does effective demand for the service compare to the cost of providing it? And finally, what factors affect communities' demand? The professional service partner was Everflow, which was operated by a nonprofit called International Lifeline Fund. In exchange for payments from communities, Everflow provided them monthly hand pump preventive maintenance, an annual pump overhaul, which means taking it apart and replacing worn-out components, and promises to dispatch a trained mechanic to fix the pump within 24 hours of receiving a call on its toll-free telephone hotline. The study consisted of a price experiment for the Everflow service, and it represented the two districts of the study. We randomly selected 113 community water committees. Everflow marketed the service to them as a subscription, and an auction procedure was used to randomly assign a price to each committee to elicit how much they would be willing and able to pay for up to 1 year. The price range was the equivalent of $22 to $49 per hand pump per month, which spans the range of plausible operating costs. To put these prices in perspective, they represent about 1% of household cash income in this context. I'll first summarize the service delivery results, which were generally good. 86% of repair dispatches were made within the target response time of 24 hours. And the service averaged only 1.5 days to fix breakdowns, which is much faster than the average of 2 weeks that we found under baseline conditions. Most water committees that paid also reported being satisfied with the service. Despite the encouraging service delivery, effective demand was low. No water committee paid for more than 1 month at prices that would cover operating costs. And by the end of the study, just 4% of water committees continued to pay at any price that we offered. We identified several factors that likely contributed to this low demand. Communities that knew the nonprofit from prior and highly subsidized projects were willing to pay less, suggesting that switching from a more charitable model to a social enterprise model was difficult. Separately from the professional service, about a quarter of water committees also got free support for repairs, either from the government, political candidates, or nonprofits. And most households used other water sources in addition to the study hand pumps. I want to emphasize that these conditions and institutional activities are not wrong in principle, but they do appear to have undermined demand for a more entrepreneurial approach to solving this problem of unreliable rural water supply. I'll leave you with 4 takeaways. First, professionalized maintenance delivered fast repairs and satisfied customers, showing that it was technically feasible even in a low-income and rural setting. But demand was definitively lower than needed to cover even the operating costs of the service. And there were important structural disincentives that likely limited effective demand for a higher level of maintenance. So based on this evidence, we should not expect rural water users in lower-income countries to pay for a substantial share of professionalizing their water services. But on a positive note, shifting to a professionalized service model, if it could be sufficiently financed, would be a really good idea. Based on our data, it would cost, overall, 40% less in the long term to professionally maintain all hand pumps in the study area, compared to continuing to build new pumps, letting them fail, and then have to rely on the government or international aid to pay to replace them. So key questions that came up were therefore, what funding models can cover most of the cost of professionalizing rural water services? And could rural utility models in particular be effective? These will be important areas for future research on rural water. Thank you so much for your interest, and I look forward to your questions and discussion.
All right, very nice. Our next 2 videos are really about long-term stressors, particularly how climate change is impacting systems and what technology might be available to solve some of these issues. So this will be, our next presentation will be by Sarah Evans and Catherine Bergman from Well Beyond. And their presentation will be technology to maintain water systems, improve health, and increase opportunities. Here we go.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. We are Sarah Evans and Catherine Bergman from Well Beyond, and we have a combined 18 years of experience in the international development sector. We began our journey in clean water infrastructure in rural developing regions with the NGO Well Aware that I founded in 2008. Well Aware has now brought large-scale clean water solutions to more than 80 communities in East Africa, and we have maintained a 100% success rate across all projects over the last 12 years. We are very proud of this achievement, as most water systems fail shortly after implementation in our regions of work.
We want to start by introducing you to a community in rural Kenya called Laikipia. It's a very remote, very dry place, and for a long time, they've struggled with access to clean water. The people who live here were part of the 785 million people in the world who don't have access to clean and safe drinking water. An NGO arrived and provided a brand new borehole. Months later, the costly new well broke down, and the community was without any information or guidance on how to attempt repairs. The NGO also didn't know it had broken down, But even if they had, it might have been too expensive and logistically burdensome to invest further in their long-term maintenance. This is obviously a problem for the people in Laikipia, and it's also a big issue for the NGO. Funders are now aware that a lot of resources are being wasted by building wells that break down and are then forgotten about. We're living in a much more transparent time, and NGOs now need to be able to truly report on the progress and impact they're having in a way they've never had to before, because funders are now demanding it, and much of the NGO revenue depends on it.
This issue in Laikipia is just what's happening across our sector. The international development sector is mammoth and almost undefinable, with billions of dollars being wasted every year on unsustainable projects. The reality is that water system infrastructure in rural developing regions often fails. And when projects fail, this means a larger burden on the beneficiaries, specifically for women and girls in the community. Meanwhile, connectivity to technology is surging in developing countries. People's access and usage of smartphones in developing countries has been increasing phenomenally. 45% of adults in developing countries have smartphones, and 3G is expanding rapidly. Plus, 70% of sub-Saharan Africa has internet connectivity. Since mobile phones and internet coverage is increasing, there is now a profound opportunity to leverage that advancement with digital solutions to the huge problem that is lack of water system sustainability.
We are responding to this hidden crisis by creating the Well Beyond app, which is taking our expertise of these water systems and placing it into the hands of the community members. We're providing maintenance and diagnostic information for these water projects, as well as education materials on a broad range of health and sanitation issues. In turn, this provides crucial measurement and evaluation reporting for our clients, the NGOs. With the impact reporting that we facilitate, NGOs are able to procure more funding, which in turn grows the impact they are able to achieve. For a long time now, the sector has known that infrastructure alone is not the complete solution. We all know that NGOs and governments have been struggling with the time, energy, and funds needed to address this crisis because they've been unable to fill this information and communication gap. We're now solving that for them in the communities that they serve.
Let's go back to Laikipia County. As a pilot, we deployed our app in Laikipia County when they reported that there was no longer water coming from the faucet. With our app, we were able to remotely help them troubleshoot the issue and repair it on their own. In under 2 hours, their water system was working again. Now, in our experience, over a decade of doing this work in East Africa, this problem would have taken at least 2 weeks to resolve. The community would have tried to contact their regional office to schedule a technician to travel out to Laikipia. The technician would have potentially had to make multiple trips and ultimately charge them for expensive repairs. Realistically, it would have taken the community 2 weeks to get the water flowing again. 2 weeks without their only source of clean water. We know that every day a water system is down, the less likely it's ever going to work again. The longer it's broken, the less likely it is to be repaired. With our technology, we diagnosed and helped them fix the issue in 2 hours at no cost to the community.
To date, we have 13 partner organizations deploying the tool in Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Uganda, Somalia, and India. We have trained more than 3,000 people in 53 communities globally on COVID-19 defense, community water system management training, impact measurement, and more. Additionally, the maintenance and diagnostics tool has been deployed in over 25 communities, resulting in identifying issues, avoiding costly repairs, and extending the lives of water systems. Next, we are focused on upscaling the app to new and existing water projects to focus on their maintenance and community water planning, as well as disseminating WASH-related information such as feminine hygiene, water treatment, drip irrigation and crop tracking, and water management training. Our partners using the Well Beyond app see cost savings for mileage and transportation, operational efficiency, project replacement costs, as well as technician, contractor, and third-party costs. Partners are also compiling uniform data on their projects via the use of the app, which is helping them to inform improvements and support fundraising efforts. When systems are up and functioning properly, there is on average 64% decrease in disease rates, 34% increase in education, and 58% increase in education for girls.
We thank you all for the opportunity to be here today, and we can't wait to follow up with the impact we plan to have with partners in the years to come.
That was terrific. We're going to end and have our final video from Professor Norm Graham at Michigan State University. He will be speaking about large-scale solutions, challenges and solutions, and we'll be talking about emerging water and food, security challenges in the water, energy, food nexus in Central Asia. So let's get that one rolling. And here we go.
Hey, I am Norman Graham, a professor of international relations at James Madison College of Public Affairs at Michigan State University, and director of the Center for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the university. As such, I have been involved for several years with a multidisciplinary team of researchers at MSU and partner universities in Central Asia on the water, energy, food nexus in that region. Here is a partial list of the members of our team, many of whom contributed to the research I shall try to summarize briefly today. Here are our research questions. You see we're focused on the sustainability of agriculture and inland fisheries in Central Asia and the extent to which the collapse of the Soviet Union affected water sharing. What explains the downturn in fishery production? Are there prospects for more sustainable use and management of water resources in the region more generally, including diversification of agricultural production and new techniques of irrigation, organic pest management, and pollution control? Here's a map of the region. You see we're focused on the successor states to the Soviet Union that are independent in the early 1990s and located in Central Asia. Characteristics. This is a landlocked region of dramatic landscape diversity. Water scarcity has long been a hallmark of this endorheic region. Evaporation assumes an exaggerated role. The entire region is dependent on precipitation that falls on relatively small areas at high elevation, principally in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Western China. Some of the water is retained in glaciers and high mountain lakes, but much of it is redistributed in lowlands of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. The collapse of inland fisheries in the region is due to cumulative effects of overfishing and poor water management decisions, including the devastating Soviet legacy. Now here's a portion of the region focusing on Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, and Caspian Aral Seas. You see the rivers Sirdarya and Amudarya coming down from the mountains and ending up essentially into what is the Aral Sea, what used to be the Aral Sea. This map shows some of the heavy irrigation zones that were developed over many years in Central Asia that in fact resulted in the collapse of the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea was a prominent small-scale fisheries site even as late as the 1950s. But as you see from this series of maps from 1977 to 2013, there was a dramatic decline in the water levels, essentially drying up by 2013. That small-scale fishery center in the Aral Sea now is a desert with stranded boats. What's the cause? Well, largely the cotton monoculture developed during the Soviet period, which because of the desire to be independent in cotton production and mounted to elaborate irrigation systems bringing large quantities of water to the desert to make cotton grow in the desert. This dramatically reduced the flow of water to the Aral Sea, and it essentially dried up. Here's an example of one of the canals, the Great Fergana Canal, over 270 kilometers long, created by 160,000 workers, largely by hand, in 45 days. A massive effort by hand to turn back nature and to make it work for Soviet purposes. Now, one of our key concerns here is on the challenges of sustaining inland fisheries, given this kind of water usage challenge. This shows the collapse, in a sense, of inland fisheries in Central Asia after the independence of the region, given the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why the collapse? Well, the collapse of the Soviet economy and the dismemberment of the USSR left the successor states chaotic, scrambling, and distracted. The long-term environmental effects of previous policies were problematic, but a key element was the impact of the crucial energy-water nexus in the region, especially the water-rich Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan versus water-poor and energy-rich Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. This was accentuated by the legacy and continuing impact of the cotton monoculture, where there was an effort to claim unsustainable irrigation, which had dramatic impacts on fishery habitat, especially the Aral Sea. Now, what we're doing in large part in recent years is to look at a different region of Central Asia, the Ili River Lake Balkhash ecosystem. And our question is it in danger of a similar fate to the Aral Sea? The Ili River rises in the Tian Shan Mountains of China, flows almost 1,500 kilometers through semi-arid area to get to Lake Balkhash, the terminal lake, forms a fragile and unique ecosystem that has been altered by water diversion projects, reflects the typical trans-border challenges of shared waters, in this case, between China and Kazakhstan. Now, part of the challenge is that there are new hydroelectric and irrigation projects underway in China, especially to develop Western Xinjiang province, Fruit Valley, and its agricultural efforts. And we must add to this the fact that the Tian Shan ice mass has been in decline rather dramatically since 1956. At least 27% has disappeared. The commercial fishing in the Ili River, Lake Balkhash, has clearly been affected. Decline in total catch of most prized species, decline in the employment of fishers, and a more general impact economically in the region. In a situation where the prospects for economic diversification and alternative employment seem quite limited. There have been some efforts to develop aquaculture as an alternative food supply option, and there's been some success in this. This is the fleet, or one of the fishing fleets in Lake Balkhash, here under suspension in port because of desire to prevent overfishing. This gives them a chance to dry out the catch and to repair their boats. Aquaculture is an option for fish production in the region. There have been some declines since the independence of these countries to some degree, but in recent years there's been some increase, especially Uzbekistan and more recently Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. Here's a modernized facility, actually an old one that's been modernized with new techniques and feedstocks outside of Almaty. This shows what's happened to Uzbek aquaculture and capture fishery production since 1980. You can see some initial decline, but some stabilization in it, and in fact, some increase in the fish farm activity. This is a modern aquaculture installation outside of Tashkent, Uzbekistan. These are salmon, part of the production. These are sturgeon, which are both edible and useful for caviar production. The way forward. We need regional accords and harmonization of national policies. We need to address trans-border water sharing to make it fair and reliable. Continued research and development in support of aquaculture, where collapsed fisheries cannot be revived. Some effort to look at the sustainability of hydroelectric generation, which is necessary, but also needs to be done in a way that reduces potential fish habitat loss and fair water sharing. And we also need to look at sustainable agriculture to minimize water diversion and waste. The challenge of the China Belt and Road Initiative and the attendant development, especially in Western China, is challenging and should be negotiated with the impact on Central Asia in mind. We're off to a good start, I think, in some ways. Here's some examples of some of our publications, some specific information which you may look at. Thanks. I look forward to your questions and comments.
Well, I think these 4 videos really set the stage from everything from large transboundary solutions to link, sustainable water and then food, fisheries production to the local level, where if we have systems that can provide water, we get more productivity in a garden, and of course then tools that can be used by many people around the world to support access to water. So that was terrific. I'd like to introduce now Fabiana Bianchi from CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America. And she's been a co-convener and supporting this program. And she's going to lead the panel. And we're going to have all our speakers who just presented these videos join us. So if you'll turn on your videos. And hello, Fabiana. It's good to see you. And I'm going to turn the program over to you for the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. It is a pleasure for me to be moderating this panel discussion with the speakers, James Winter and Daniel Smith, water specialists at Stanford University, Sarah Evans and Catherine Berman, CEO and COO from Well Beyond, and Norma Graham, professor and director at Michigan State University, who have presented very interesting and enriching experiences in terms of actions to enable the multiple benefits of water for food and health in Zambia, Uganda, Kenya, and Central Asia. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Now moving forward on to the panel discussion, and to go deeper into some points, I would like to start with 2 round questions for the speakers. Starting with the first round of questions, and please try to summarize the answer in 2 minutes, I would like to ask the same question for each one, starting with James Winter. Please, James, based on the problem and solution presented in the videos, how do you see the nexus water, food and health, and how it helps to other socioeconomic development? Please, James, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fabiana. Over the past few decades, I would say that the research community in the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector has focused quite narrowly on the association between improvements in water supply and improvements in water quality and diarrheal prevalence as the primary health indicator, and oftentimes as the only indicator of success. And I would say that I'm heartened to see greater attention in this session and in the field at large being paid to the water, food, and health nexus. And in general, looking at water supply more broadly, integrating nutrition, food security, and water point reliability as indicators that are of equal, if not greater, levels of interest. In doing so, I think we take a broader view of the role of water in socioeconomic development. And in my opinion, yes, of course, we do need to view water as a resource for basic needs and health, but also as a resource for alleviating poverty by supplementing food availability and supporting diverse streams of income. In my case, and in my research, this is primarily manifested through the use of additional quantities of water for things like household garden production, which leads to the availability of vegetables or ability to cultivate vegetables during the dry season, as well as potentially in other regions, leading to greater numbers of livestock that can be supported at the household level. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, James. I would like to continue with the next panelist, Daniel Smith. Please, Daniel, the same question for you. Let us know, how do you see the nexus water, food, and health, and how it helps to other socioeconomic development?
Yeah, thanks, Fabiana and James. One aspect that I'd like to highlight that I think brings together a theme from each of the presentations that we just saw is that of time and people's time. So one of the themes of my work in Uganda is how to get faster repairs for water supplies. And that's exactly what we heard from Well Beyond, getting that information flowing to keep water supplies from breaking down for too long, which is not only costly, but it wastes people's time that they could be better spent, spend producing food or relaxing, which flows into people having better health, which was a theme of James' presentation. And also from Central Asia as well. If you can't fish because there are depleted stocks, that's also unproductive time that's affecting people's health and their economics as well, ultimately. So I think in the specific area of rural areas in lower income countries, especially in Uganda and Ethiopia, like we saw in the presentations, investing in better maintenance of water points, and especially those that are on premises, like we saw in Zambia, can really help to get the leverage this nexus so people can take the time they need to be with their kids, have better health, and even produce some of their own food for consumption and for sale. So I think as a water sector, we should really bring these aspects of this nexus up to the very highest levels for increasing public investment and massive scale investment from development partners. And I think this can be a really compelling way to make that case.
Thanks, Daniel. Very interesting, the comments of both of you. And going forward with the panelists from Well Beyond, Sarah Evans and Catherine Berman, please, could you tell us, how do you see the Nexus approach? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Sarah. And I want to echo what James and Daniel have already said. It's interesting listening to this conversation and discussion about how we do need to bring the nexus and the way that these things are interrelated to the forefront of these conversations, because Catherine and I have been in the weeds sometimes quite literally in water, specifically just water, with partnerships in other areas of aid. And in rural developing places. So what we know and what we've seen is that almost anything needs to start with water. We often, through the nonprofit we work with, we often get requests to come in and provide water somewhere that infrastructure has been placed but is unsuccessful because of the lack of water there. Specifically for young girls who are going to school, if there's no source of water at that facility. And once they enter puberty, they are unable to tend to their personal hygiene. They don't go to school for a week of every month. They drop out, they fall behind and they drop out. So it becomes critical to keeping kids in school. It's critical for the production of healthy food. It just needs to be the starting point of everything. And of course, it's all related. And of course, we're a little bit biased because we know most of our expertise is in the area of water and clean water and the supply of it in rural developing countries. But I'm enjoying this conversation of the need to be able to talk about this more, and as a central part of our discussion where the SDGs are concerned. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah, for your comments. To end the first round of questions, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Norman Graham. Please, Mr. Graham, could you tell us your opinion and view about the Nexus? Thank you.
Yes, well, I think thinking of it as a nexus is crucial, obviously, and I really like the way this panel has been structured and the way in which different disciplines and focal points have been brought together. I would just urge slightly that not only do we have a food, water, health nexus, but we might want to include energy, and especially in Central Asia, as a key element. And this brings me to a point that I didn't really stress probably, but might want to stress a little bit now, that there is some promise in some respects. And maybe it's having to do with the impact of energy prices and alternative energy sources and changes and concern about climate change that's happening globally. But the oil curse that in many respects harmed the prospects for diversified development in Kazakhstan and to some extent Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan is pushing these governments, and I have some optimism here to some extent, to think about diversification much more seriously and to think about conservation much more seriously. Water is much more important to them now. And they used to be able to ignore it somewhat because they had all this money coming in from oil and gas exports. And I think because we've had some changes in governments, especially in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, attention to diversification and to conservation has been somewhat promising. And now there's an old legacy and inertia and political problems. I was struck by the World Bank panel the other day that talked about migration and water, and put some emphasis on the fact that solutions are problematic because of nationalism that seems to be increasing, as well as partisan activities and short-term thinking and so forth. And so we need to obviously encourage governments to, the political question is crucial in some respects, and we need to encourage governments to respond with a long-term view and to really think about their long-term prospects. And I think this is happening more and more in Central Asia, but it's a difficult region, I think increasingly volatile. We've got the impact of Russia, the impact of China, concerns from the West, and the impact of Europe and India, and now Afghanistan and its change. So I don't want to be too optimistic, but I think there's some progress in this very complex effort to promote economic and social development in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham and all, for your interesting comments about Nexus and how it helps to other socioeconomic developments. Moving on the second round of questions, I would like to start by asking James the following question. Given the impact of climate change, could you tell us how these actions improve in the area? In other words, how has the intervention improved the frequency and intensity of productive uses of water in Zambia, such as gardening, crops, or livestock? Please, James, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Fabiana. When I think about household level piped water supply, which is the intervention that I was looking at, the transition from an unimproved water source that was maybe 200 meters away from the household to a piped water supply that was radically closer, maybe 10, 15 meters away from the home. These systems that I was looking at were designed to deliver about 50 liters per person per day in water to the households. And at this level, and especially at higher levels, at 100 and 150 liters per person per day, you start to see increases in productive uses of water, such as gardening and livestock. Unfortunately, when you're below that mark of about 50 LPCD, households are typically relying it exclusively for domestic purposes, as they don't have excess water that they can be using for livestock or for gardening. Connecting this to climate change and climate change resilience, in the regions where I've worked, there's a dominance of rain-fed, small-scale agriculture, especially for staple crop production. When drought and irregular rain cycles become more common, for example, the rainy season shifting from September to late October or something like that, this reliance on rainfall comes with elevated levels of risk and also correlated risk for entire regions. In this case, I want to note that a household piped water system that only delivers 50 liters per person per day can't replace that level of rainfall. It can't replace all of those water inputs for agriculture. It can merely be a supplemental income or a dry season income generation opportunity with household gardens. However, I want to make two separate points. First, by providing households with these opportunities to use water as a productive input, they can diversify their income streams away from a 100% reliance on rain-fed agriculture to perhaps having other more diverse streams of income. And this allows them to have their household income be more resilient to these climatic shocks. And second, while household level piped water networks typically don't provide sufficient water for agricultural irrigation on the hectare scale, they can be a precursor to more robust irrigation networks. And these can act in concert to improve economic outcomes, even in the face of climate change. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Next, I would like to ask Daniel the following questions. What thoughts do you have on creating better partnership between, for example, state and local community to enhance funding in support of improved rural service for water? Please, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks. And I say my top line thought on this is really working with those states, or in Uganda and some other countries in its region, the districts being the operative level of government, working with them to help implement policies that are already on the books for improving the long-term operation of rural water supplies, but are in a policy gap between, or implementation gap between what's written down so far and recently and what's happening on the ground. And I think as a corollary to that, we should help direct research in the WASH sector in rural areas towards that higher level of consolidating services above individual communities. And so what does that mean? In Uganda, for example, there's a national policy to start working at either a district or even a higher level where one organization would operate and maintain all of the rural water supplies in that area. That's what they call the area service provider policy. So there's more information available now. There's increasing capacity over the last 30 years in many countries. And in addition, this recognition that community management, while it's helped water access improve a lot, it has some stubborn limitations on how reliable and how financially sustainable it's been to keep these water supplies operating in the long term. So I think that development partners, nonprofits, and also the large funders can really work at that level to help look in the long term to set up the institutional environment for partnerships to implement such consolidation policies that are kind of like operating as a rural utility rather than individual projects for individual communities. And then again, on the research side, much of the research in the rural WASH field has focused on individual water points and the communities or water communities. So I think it's important to increase the kind of the geographic or institutional scale at which research is happening to support these kind of policies. There's really very little empirical research on how to do operation maintenance at that higher institutional level, and it's easier to work and collect data, water point by water point, perhaps, and it's become more normal for us, including in my research. But I really think we should start thinking about what are the more political economy, what are the institutional level questions and things we can do to help increase information about this higher level of consolidating services.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your comments. Following, I would like to continue with Sarah or Catherine, asking the following question. What actions or measures did you take in Kenya to make the community aware of the tool and to use it? How did you achieve the empowerment of the community towards the use of the app?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take this. I'm Catherine, and so as all of the speakers have mentioned, how central water is in the role of these communities and how these water systems play, a major role in their prosperity and just day-to-day lives. So
it's not a hard sell to get them to want to be more active and hands-on in the role of the water system and maintaining it and keeping it, going and up and running and functioning. We've also found, that a lot of these times, issues that go wrong in these communities and with these water systems are simple things like a broken pipe or a float switch that's disconnected, something that could be really easily fixed by the community themselves, and they're eager to learn how to do that. So just by using this tool that they already have in their hands, it's really easy to just navigate yes no questions, get to the solution, and then empower the rest of the community to maintain and keep the system up and running too. And we see when you teach the community how to do it, it empowers them to keep it up and running and keep the system going and learning how to operate all of the things. So yeah, a local team deploying. We also have a really amazing local team that helps train the communities on the first time to use it. We have real-time chat support built within the app. So if they ever have any questions, they're able to, just reach out and we're able to answer and get out there or whatever they need. So it's definitely a group effort and they're learning very quickly. And it's really great to also be able to interact with them real time and know exactly what's happening on the ground. So I think there's a lot of benefits to technology in this water space.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. Very interesting, the action taken. To move forward, I would like to ask Norman the following question. When you mention in your conclusion on the way forwards, research and development in support of aquaculture where collapsed fisheries cannot be reactivated, could you please give some example about what kind of research and development is needed, especially in transboundary waters?
Sure. So I'm a professor of international relations and Russian studies. And so it'd be better if we asked this question probably to the fish biologists on our teams, but we work very closely with them in this interdisciplinary team. And so I certainly have some thoughts on this from my exposure to the various technologies that they're looking at. There certainly are ways of improving production of aquaculture. And part of that has to do with saving the water, saving the habitat in some respects, and structuring the nature of the environment for the fish farms to operate so that they're healthy, don't have disease problems and so forth, and that there's sustainable water flow and the like. But a big part of it clearly is just the challenge of having cost-effective inputs that lead to fish that can contribute to the nutrition of the Central Asian populations, as well as serve as export opportunities. And the big problem here in some respects is the need for local production of cost-effective feed for the fish. And there's a lot of work being done on this. There is a challenge that sometimes it seems like the cost of the feed and the amount of the feed going into producing a pound of fish is in fact more than what you get out of it. And that's really a challenge. A big problem for Central Asia is the fact that there's very little in the way so far of local production of this fish feed. In fact, they tend to import it from as far away as the Netherlands and in Western Europe. And so they got to find a better way of doing that. And they're making some real progress. We visited some of the feed operations that are developing, especially in Kazakhstan. I think on the transborder issue, there is some very interesting research being done by doctoral students in our partner universities, especially at Al-Farabi Kazakh National University, which are really looking at the record of negotiations, especially between Kazakhstan and China, that are aimed at producing a better water sharing agreement that's enforceable and reliable. And I think there's some reason to believe that it'll be important. China needs Central Asia for its Belt and Road Initiative to work, And Kazakhstan obviously needs a fair deal from China on the amount of water that comes down to Kazakhstan from several of the rivers that start in China or in Russia. And so there's some prospect there, I think. We're learning a lot, but we don't have all the solutions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Norman. Without any doubts, there will be a lot to exchange on the issue of transboundary waters. It's a very interesting topic to discuss and share knowledge. Finally, before closing the panel, I would like to especially thank the panelists for your participation in this session. It was very interesting to learn about your work, experiences, and action to enable multiple benefits of water for food and health. And thank you very much to all attendees. To continue with the next part of the session, I would like to give the floor to the chair, John Rose. Please, John, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabiana, and again, thanks to the panel. That was terrific. And we're going to take a very short breather, and that's about 1 minute. We're going to get set up for a breakout session. We don't have a lot of time for the breakout session, but you'll be automatically placed into sessions. And we'd like you to answer one of two questions. One, how has COVID and/or climate change changed what you need to do, or what you think the work that needs to be done that can focus in and provide solutions for and move the Sustainable Development Goals forward for SDG 2 and SDG 6. The second question might be, is there actions or innovation, maybe social technical policies that can happen to accelerate the food, nutrition, health, water security, especially for the most vulnerable? So these are the two questions. Your chairs will have that. Our breather is just for 1 minute. If you'll go to the Pathable platform, you can hit the poll and you can answer a few questions about yourselves. We're going to try to capture this information, capture the breakout information, and put this together as a report. So we appreciate your participation in this. So we'll give you a 1 minute breather to go to the Pathable, hit the poll, answer some questions. Then we're going to separate you all out into breakout sessions. I know we don't have a lot of time, but we really appreciate any comments that you might be able to provide us. So Arturo, you'll go ahead.
Yes, it's ready. So we will have 18 minutes for each breakout room. We will have 4 rooms. And so please, the chairs and the supporters, please introduce yourself and you can move smoothly your breakout rooms. So I will send you there. See you in 18 minutes. Thank you.
You're fine, Joanne. You're fine.
You can hear me now? All right, very good. I did want to ask Franz if you had any closing comments. You've been a great contributor with Fabiana, and we're leading some of the first session. And as you've gone through all 3 sessions, if you had any closing comments you wanted to make.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I didn't expect that, but thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I would like to summarize saying that, we have seen in many documents written, but I think it's very obvious now that water is at the core of sustainable development. And we can see it very clear during this session, not beyond this third session, but from the beginning, because we have discussing from the public policy perspective, also to working in the field about the interlinkages between SDG 2 and SDG 6. And we know that SDG 6 can be connected not only with SDG 2, but also with other SDGs. Ending hunger and malnutrition requires access to safe drinking water, hydroelectricity, etc., agricultural systems, of course. But I would like to stress also the importance of the changes in food systems are also needed to meeting SDG 6 targets, and also to work considering environmental sustainability in food-based dietary guidelines and the nutrition footprint, I think. So following these examples from Voices in the Field and also coming up with these examples on rural piped water and how it connects reducing fetching water in order to improve income and gardening, for instance, in the case of Zambia, and other examples we have seen, that it's very clear that we must work together. I mean, not to have silos, but working more, looking for the compliance of the SDG 6 along with other SDGs. And I think it requires not only more investment, but also more cooperation, more alliances, and also to share knowledge based on this holistic perspective. So I'm very glad, and thank you very much for letting me say these short words, and I congratulate for managing this session. Thank you very much.
It's such a challenge for us all to come together in this format. We know we like it when we're together face to face and person to person and exchanging knowledge, and knowledge exchange was one of the issues brought up in all three sessions. And apps, you know, Sarah and Catherine, like you've provided, brings people information and knowledge for rapid action. I was so impressed with that 2-hour time frame. And I think we were also talking about scale. You know, you're talking about the largest scale of transboundary waterways where, you know, you have to have governments getting involved across nations to make good policies. It means that, you know, the UN, it means, you know, the banks all have to be working at that scale, that very high scale with governments, but all the way down to this you know, smaller scale, you know, that we saw that James and Daniel presented, that really means that if we bring water right to the household, we improve health, we improve food security, we improve education, time for education, and so many different things. And I think that we need to look at these financial models, you know, as Daniel suggested, that are going to provide resources at the very local scale, you know, to get to gain access here. And so finally, I'd like to say that I was struck by the optimism and the actual action that's taking place despite COVID, despite climate change and all of the challenges we're facing and some of our own feelings right now that we're having of isolation or what have you. I was struck by all the videos and our discussion of being one of optimism at these various scales. And so that makes me feel much better. And it's been a pleasure to be part of developing this session with my co-conveners. I thank all the participants. Thank the audience for hanging in there and Zooming all week and going to all these different sessions. And we're hoping to see everyone face to face in the future. We are going to gather our materials. I want to thank Jenny Barron, who's been like, really, she's been quiet in the background, but she's been leading this session, and Arturo Salazar, our young professional, who's been helping us with all the coordination and logistics. I hope we'll see everyone in person in a year, and we'll see you in Zoom, I guess, at some other sessions. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you very much to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.